समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Enveloped in her black, all-covering burqa, Farishta Jami emerged through her front door, peering out at the searing green of an English spring. 15 years after she'd been sent from Afghanistan to marry a man she had never met, she had finally found the will to no longer be a prisoner of her violent and abusive husband. Each morning, the mother of four would leave her apartment in the quiet suburb of Stratford-upon-Avon and go to work serving lunch to children at a local school. Few seemed to be aware of the new arrival in their community. I noticed her, one local woman later remembered, but not many others did. Late at night, Farishta would travel to another faraway world. Police would discover thousands of videos on the Islamic State propaganda channels, some of which she ran on Telegram, showing how to operate automatic weapons and manufacture homemade explosive devices. There were videos of children staging suicide bombings, and one of a disabled man in a wheelchair strapping on an explosive vest. Tamora, the vengeful goth queen in the bleak tragedy Titus Andronicus, which was imagined into being by the young William Shakespeare at his home just walking distance from Farishta's apartment, had vowed this: "I'll find a day to massacre them all and raise their faction and their family." Farishta was convicted in February on charges of preparing to join the Islamic State in Afghanistan, together with her children, who she hoped would become fighters or suicide attackers. Later this week, European leaders are scheduled to discuss how to continue operating the last remnants of what was once the Islamic State's sprawling caliphate. The prison camps of Al-Hol and Al-Roj, which hold some 55,000 prisoners, mainly women and children. President Donald Trump's administration has terminated funding for the camps as part of its cuts, and fears are being voiced that the Kurdish militia who run the camps and prisons will no longer be able to secure them without the money. Thousands of Islamic State cadres are already reported to have escaped. Evidence that the Islamic State is seeking to resurrect itself isn't hard to come by. Researchers Mona Thakkar and Ricardo Val, in a granular account of Islamic State fundraising, have shown how prisoners at Al-Hol and Al-Roj are using cryptocurrency to sustain the core of their organization. Through last year, the organization also succeeded in mounting a series of lethal operations across the world. 4 ethnic Tajik terrorists who are now on trial in Russia succeeded in killing 145 people at the Crocus Theatre in Moscow. Likely inspired, at least in part, by Islamic propaganda, former United States Army officer Shamsuddin Jabbar killed 14 people in New Orleans. There were murderous attacks on a church in Turkey and a mausoleum in Iran. That's not counting the large number of attacks that security services successfully interdicted. There was the attempt to bomb a Taylor Swift concert in Vienna, planned strikes on Olympic events in Paris, a network operating out of the Côte d'Ivoire and Madagascar that was seeking to route attackers from those countries to Europe. Even greater evil has been playing out in regions of the world where the Islamic State has already secured some degree of territorial control. Earlier this month, 70 Christians were found beheaded in a church in Lubero in the war-torn North Kivu province of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The violence in Congo is being carried out by an organization called the Allied Democratic Forces, a militia that has allied itself publicly with the Islamic State's Central African wing. Local Islamic State militia have said that Christians must either convert or pay religious taxes called jizya. To the north, Islamic State wings control massive swathes of territory. The Islamic State, for example, rules northern Mali's Menaka province and parts of its Gao region since 2023. The Islamic State and other jihadist groups control over half of Burkina Faso. Islamist insurgents have increasingly choked the lines of communication to significant cities and have spread operations towards coastal countries like Benin, Togo, and the Côte d'Ivoire. There is simply no precedent in history for a terrorist organization that has been able to maintain such a tempo of violence across such an enormous geographical space. What is it then that has allowed the organization to set down roots from underdeveloped corners of the Sahara to the most sophisticated capitals of Europe? Farishta's story offers us some clues. Across Europe, there have been dozens of incidents where immigrants have been involved in plotting violence against the very communities where they have sought haven. In France last month, a 37-year-old Algerian killed a 69-year-old man and injured 5 police officers while shouting religious slogans. A Turkish teenager was arrested in Austria just days before that attack for plotting to bomb Vienna's Westbahnhof station using pipe bombs he had learned to make on the internet. Farhad Nouri, an Afghan immigrant, ploughed his car into shoppers in Munich. Even though Europe's right wing argues that these immigrants are a kind of Trojan horse carrying the Islamic State into Europe, the truth is more complex and worth unpacking. The scholars Jean-Victor Alipour and Youp Age Harm Adema, after a thorough review of the statistical evidence, have concluded that immigrants to Germany, which they studied, do not disproportionately commit violent crimes, terrorism or otherwise. An earlier study by Rita Magularia and Schilke Uebelmesser came to very similar conclusions. The more useful question we need to ask is why some, like Farishta, are then being drawn to the Islamic State. Too little is known of her story, like those of most Islamic State affiliated individuals, to draw hard conclusions. But we should maybe be talking about the young mother's life in a brutal country, the trauma of domestic violence and the desire for empowerment. All of these might have had some role. Like many other jihadists though, Farishta seems to have been deeply alienated from her immediate social milieu, lonely and vulnerable to recruitment, to her cause that may have seemed to give her life at least the simulacrum of meaning. Large numbers of studies of English jihadists similarly have shown that anger against racism, guilt over past sexual or social behavior, and the search for power and agency all contributed to the lure of the Islamists. In online groups, jihadist recruits find a sense of community absent in their real-world lives. The ghettoization of immigrant groups into particular neighborhoods also serves to cut off young immigrants from the wider community, much like Farishta was. In this sense, the members of jihadist groups aren't dissimilar to the kinds of people who get recruited to criminal street gangs, or for that matter, Hindu nationalist vigilante groups. This sense of alienation, strangely, wouldn't be unfamiliar to jihadist recruits in Africa. In Mali and Mozambique's Cabo de Delgado, Caleb Weiss writes, the Islamic State offers recruits extensive opportunities to participate in dawa or religious proselytization. This gives recruits the opportunity to gain social status and agency, both of which young people lack in underdeveloped or backward societies. Joining a terrorist group also gives young men a chance to exercise power over the community, particularly over young women. Failure by nation states to implement policies that include and empower vulnerable young people then may lie at the heart of why organizations like the Islamic State are succeeding in so many different milieus. These aren't the only extremist groups, after all, which are growing. We've seen white nationalism and a range of other organizations also exercise influence. In Afghanistan or Somalia, there is no nation state to intervene in the lives of young people. In well-off Europe, the failure to build networks of support is less understandable and less excusable. Located on the edge of collapse, some nation states are seeking to stamp out the Islamic State by unleashing massive counter-violence. The countries of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, which all saw anti-Western juntas installed in coups after 21, have recruited Russian mercenaries and set up local militia to fight the threat. The consequence, though, has been indiscriminate violence, which has deepened the resentments that fueled the Islamic State's growth in the first place. Europe and the wider West, for their part, seem to lack any coherent strategy to encourage the assimilation of migrant groups into the community. Long decades after immigrants first arrived in Western countries, many communities remain economically and educationally marginalized. This does not always manifest in terrorism, as I mentioned earlier. Sweden, for example, faces a crippling problem of ethnicity-based gang violence, and that's common in many Western European countries. Yet, this tells us there is an underlying social fracture, and that fracture creates a ready pool of recruits from which the radical movements like the Islamic State can draw. For years now, counterterrorism experts have been underlining again and again the need to build viable nation states out of the ruins of countries like Syria and Iraq and Libya, and to mirror counterterrorism efforts in Africa with the sustained construction of state capacity. The collapse of the Afghan Republic in 2021 graphically demonstrated that coercion alone was not enough to defeat terrorism or insurgencies. An official United States investigation revealed that the billions of dollars spent in aid on Afghanistan often went into ill-designed and wasteful projects that enriched local elites and Western companies but did very little for the country's people. An audit of programs meant for the welfare in immigrants in Europe, I suspect, would likely reveal much the same. As Trump's slashing of budgets for aid to countries like Syria show, the lessons haven't been learned. The Islamic State isn't the problem. It's just cashing in on the failure of the world's powerful nation states to deal with the problem they're confronted with. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.